Wow. Time just flies by, doesn't it? It just keeps rushing by, and it's just hard for me it's almost unfathomable to remember that was 21 years ago that happened. I remember, just like I'm sure those of you that are old enough to remember, that you remember precisely where you were and what was taking place when the news was breaking. I hope, and even though it is painful, as Eric said, I hope we as a people never, ever forget because of what happened and how it changed our country and how it's changed our world. There's a story of a group of friends who, when they turned 30 years old, they kind of had a reunion, and they got together and said, hey, let's go out to eat. Where do you want to go? And somebody suggested the Glowing Embers restaurant. He said, because the waiters are young and attractive, and it's just a high-energy place, so let's go there. And they all agreed. 15 years after that, when they turned 45, they got back together again for a reunion, and they said, where do you want to go to eat? And they said, well, let's go to the Glowing Embers restaurant. They said, I understand that the food and wine selection is just awesome. And they all agreed. Another 15 years passed, and at the age of 60, all of these friends got back together for another reunion. And somebody suggested going to the Glowing Embers because it's a peaceful and quiet place. It's smoke-free, and they all agreed. Another 15 years later, at the age of 75, they all got back together again, and they said, where do you want to go to eat? And somebody said, let's go to the Glowing Embers, because it's very physically accessible, and they have an elevator. And they all agreed. Finally, 15 years later, at the age of 90, the same group says, one last time, we need to get together. And they got together, and somebody suggested going to eat at the Glowing Embers because we've never been there before. And they all agreed. So, memories, remembering. It's such a huge, important part of our lives. And when I'm talking about this, I know some of your minds go to maybe somebody that you love, somebody that you've known who was in your past, suffered from memory issues and Alzheimer's or dementia. And we've all been touched by that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. That's not even where I'm going. Think about this. Without memory, we are adrift. What an anchor is to a ship, memory is to our lives. Consider this. Memory anchors us to the past, interprets the present, and guides us to the future. If we do not remember, we drift. Consider the case of a man named Jimmy who had a rare neurological disorder called Korsakoff syndrome. It affects his memory. The story is told by Dr. Oliver Sacks, who worked at this convalescent home that Jimmy lived at. And the first time that Dr. Sacks met him, Jimmy came into his office and sat down and said, hi, Doc. Hiya, Doc. Nice morning. Mind if I sit here? And the interview began. You see, Jimmy remembered everything about his childhood. He remembered going to school. He remembered his friends. He remembered enlisting in the Navy and serving during World War II. But that was it. From that point forward, he remembers nothing longer than a few minutes at a time. And now, 30 years later, and this was a story from 1975, 30 years later, the only things that Jimmy remembered are the things that were from when he was 19 years old or younger. And Dr. Sacks tells that many, many times this same thing was repeated. And Jimmy would come into his office and say, hiya, Doc. Good morning, isn't it? Mind if I sit here? Dr. Sacks wrote, I've never encountered, never even imagined such a power of amnesia that a possibility existed of a pit in our minds that in which everything is swallowed up. The workers there at the convalescent home referred to Jimmy as a lost soul, wandering. On a day I hope that all Americans, all Christians, that the thought of remembering is so much in the front of our minds that it'll open our hearts to talk about what God says about remembering. And I just want to mention a few things. God teaches us what needs to be remembered. You see, in the Bible, memory and remembering involves more than just the cognitive part. Where we talk about the cognitive, the brain action of it is, oh, I forgot my keys. I can't remember where I put my keys. I can't remember the answer to this test that I just studied for. Biblical memory, remembering, is so much more than that because it involves the emotion and more importantly involves the will to remember. Just take the word remember, remembering. Break it in two parts. Remember. It's the same thing as reattach. If we had a finger or a toe cut off in an accident and we go and they reattach it. Remembering is the same way. We take something that happened in the past and we have been separated by time from the event, and remembering reattaches what happened. We reattach the past to the present, and it makes the memory come alive. And it guides us to the future. For instance, when God spoke to Moses on the mountain and said this, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. He wasn't saying try to remember that there is a day of the week that we call the Sabbath. He was saying remember it. Keep it holy. That's an act of the will. Or a childless woman named Hannah who prayed for a son. And she said, "Oh Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life." Attach my prayer, what my heart has been, to what the future can be and have a son. What did the thief hanging on the cross beside Jesus say? Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, please take what is happening now and then the future that you will attach what we have talked about here, and you will remember it. Or the angel speaking to a scared and confused group of followers of Jesus and saying, "He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee." That's biblical remembering. We need to remember. We need that kind of memory. We need an anchor because we tend to drift. A number of you probably remember the old hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." It was written by Robert Robertson in 1758. And I've highlighted one of the lines here. And I'm sure that you remember that. Sing that with me. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. This writer, he understood that I love God, but I have the ability, the tendency to drift even from God himself. Can you find in yourself anywhere and you can entertain the possibility that I could forget someone I love, that I could drift from someone I love, that I could drift from God, as the writer says? Or are you so secure in your own abilities that you say, "I'll never drift. That could never happen to me"? Janice and I were able to attend a preacher's conference, I guess you would say, this week up in Asheville at the Cove. And one of my favorite people, Bob Russell was the leader, and so I was very excited to be there. We got there, and on Wednesday night, we checked into our room that's there on the grounds, and as you always do, you think of something else you needed, so I ran out to the truck to get that. Gone just a few minutes. I came back, and I come down to our room, and I just, y'all got to do is touch the room card to it, and it goes beep, beep, but the door wouldn't open. So beep, beep, shake on the door. Beep, beep, shake on the door. And I was about ready to pound on the door, and I said, can't Janice open the door for me? I look, and it's not my room. And I remember my face, and I said, and I just took off down the hallway. I said, before they get to this door, I'm going to be gone. 5 minutes. 5 minutes I was removed from where my room was. And I walked into that hotel and turned left instead of right. Do we have the tendency, the ability to forget? Hebrews 2:1 says, we must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. 237 times in the New International Version of the Bible, the word remember is used. You think God may be trying to tell us something? But there's not only what we need to remember, there are things that we need to forget. Most of us wish we had a better memory. I know how frustrated I get when I can't remember something. I would settle for improved memory of computer and app passwords. I'm not greedy. If I could just have that memory, I'll be fine. But we get frustrated ourselves that I've got to make another trip to town. I was just up there and I didn't get this. Or I forget an assignment, or I forget to call somebody back. It's just all of these things. Jill Price has a rare condition doctors call superior autobiographical memory. Jill can recall in vivid detail every single day of her life since she was the age of 14. Now that sounds wonderful because she can remember every precious moment she's ever had with loved ones and family, and that brings her much comfort. But she says she also remembers every insult, every bad decision, every embarrassing moment she has ever had in her life. She said over the years, the memories have eaten her up. She feels paralyzed and assaulted by her very memory. And she said, peaceful sleep is rare. Psalm 25, verse 7 says, remember not the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you are good, O Lord. Isn't that what we want? Then we come to God and we cry, don't remember what those terrible things I did when I was young. Block those out. But remember me. Don't just throw me to the side. Remember me, O God. Or like David, after his sin with Bathsheba, cried out to God. He says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Isn't that what we want? We don't want to remain that old person that's just dealing with our past and all of the things that just drag us down. We want to be new and pure. If we believe what Paul said in Romans 6:6, he said, for we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin, right? That's what we try to remember and believe, is that the old has been crucified. It's gone. It's dead. We're not slaves to who we were. And if we believe that, then can anything good come from holding on to something that God says, let go of? In a small Midwestern town, there was a lady that was termed as, people described her as the crazy woman. Because she walked all over town, and that's about all she did, was she walked every day through the towns, and people would say, well, she did. She talked to herself constantly. And if you did speak to her, she'd tell you that she talks to Jesus and Jesus talks to her all the time. So therefore, she was described as the crazy lady. A new preacher moved into this small town, and of course she was described to him about this lady. And so when he met her on the street one day, he said, I understand you talk to Jesus. She says, oh, I certainly do. He said, would you do me a favor? She said, I'd love to. He says, the next time you talk to Jesus, will you ask him what was the last sin that I repented of? She said, I will be glad to do that for you. And they parted company. A day or two went by until he met her on the street again, and feeling so full of himself and being so smart and wanting to prove her as she didn't talk to Jesus, he said, hi, did you get to talk to Jesus? She says, oh, it was wonderful, I did. He said, well, what did he say when you asked him about what was the last sin I repented of? She said, oh, he said he didn't remember. Can anything good come from holding on to what God says let go of? Psalm 103 verse 12 says, as far as the east is from the west, so far he has removed our transgressions from us. That's God's take on the thing. And the third thing I want to mention is this, just simply remind me not to forget. A friend of ours in college, a very talented young man, Jay Banks, was a songwriter, and I remember that he wrote a song entitled, Remind Me Not to Forget. And he talks about, all the great and wonderful things of God. Don't let me forget. Don't let me forget these things. What can we do to not forget? Is there actually something we can do to not forget? Because biblical memory is not an act, doesn't come by accident or happen chance. Remember, it's an act of not only the mind, but the emotion and the will to remember. I want to just mention very quickly 3 things that maybe will help you like I'm hoping it'll help me. And they all involve our space. So just get these things down. The first one is to speak. Just think of your lips, your tongue. Colossians 3:16 says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. You see, as a Christian, and we speak, it is a daily rehearsal. It is a daily recounting, recall, repeat, a recite, a review of all that we know and believe about God. And it's about being here each week that you're reminded of these things, of what is spoken. How is it that you remember songs from 40, 50 years ago, and you can remember the words and the tunes? I can tell you why. You not only listen, but you spoke those songs. You sang those songs. It may have been in the car or in the shower, but you sang. So you spoke forth those songs. How is it that children that remember a Bible verse that they learned in Sunday school 25 years ago? It's because they spoke forth. They speak those things, and not only listen, but they say them. That's the power of speaking. I guarantee that if you remember those things, it's because you used your lips, your mouth, to say those things. There's a power in speaking, repeating the things that we have seen and heard. The second thing is not just to speak it, but think of your ear. You listen. You listen. You listen to songs. You listen to sermons. You listen to Sunday school lessons. You listen to Scripture. You listen to the Holy Spirit. But you also listen to each other. That's the power of being in a group, in a Sunday school class, and being here, especially the smaller the group gets, you actually listen to each other. C.S. Lewis wrote in his book, Mere Christianity, he said this, one must train the habit of faith by making such main doctrines as held before your mind every day. In other words, you have to, even though you say you believe it and you've made the conscious decision, I believe this, you have to continually bring it to mind. We must be continually reminded of what we believe. Neither this belief or any other will automatically remain alive in the mind. It must be fed. We speak it. We repeat it. We listen to it. We're reminded, and it's constantly before us of all of these things. And one of the best places to do that is in a group that we will listen. In a little bit, we're going to sing some more. And you'll get a chance to speak it, but you'll get to listen to it too, to listen to the voices around you. People just like you saying these things. And finally, I just want to mention this one, is to eat and drink. To eat and drink. What did your mind go to immediately? Mine went to the Lord's Supper. Jesus called his disciples together on that last night and said, I need to be with you. And how did he choose the setting? He chose a setting of a meal. And he was going to use that time to remind them of the past, prepare them for what was going to happen that night, and then tie it all together of this is where it's going to take you in the future. Some of the most precious words in my mind, in my ears, and I guarantee you the same for you, it's the words that you've heard at some time or another, and hopefully many, many times, is where you're out playing or you're out somewhere and the door opened and someone, a mom or dad, said, it's time to come in and eat. Come to the table. Let's eat. And what you wouldn't give to hear those words again. Amen? We eat and we drink. Now, right now, as Eric and the group leads us in singing, you get to speak. You get to listen. And then we'll eat and drink together.